Good evening, everyone. We're just taking a few moments to admit participants from the waiting room. It will be starting in just a few minutes. We kindly ask that you update your name on Zoom to the name you registered with so our team can easily identify you during the public comment session of tonight's workshop. Please note that tonight's workshop is being recorded for future viewing on the ESD website. By participating in tonight's workshop, you are granting permission to have your name, voice, and likeness recorded. Everyone has been placed on mute. Please note that we will walk participants through a phone and Zoom overview after the workshop has officially opened. Please email Sharon at carpstrategies.com for help with technical issues. Good evening, everyone. We are just taking a few moments to admit participants from the waiting room. We'll be starting in just 1 minute. We kindly ask that you update your name on Zoom to the name you registered with so that our team can easily identify you during the public comment session of tonight's workshop. Please note that everyone has been placed on mute. We will walk participants through a phone and Zoom overview after the workshop is opened. Please email Sharon at carpstrategies.com for help with technical issues. Okay, I think we can get started, Kelly. Good evening and welcome to Public Workshop number 4 for Atlantic Yards Redevelopment Project. For those of you that attended one or more of the previous public workshops, or for those of you that completed the online survey, thank you so much for your time and feedback. Tonight's workshop will summarize what we've heard throughout the engagement process so far. The virtual meeting will start with an introductory presentation from ESD outlining the major themes that came up in previous workshops in the online survey and how those ideas may inform the proposed redevelopment. Following the presentation, participants will have the opportunity to ask questions and share feedback during a public comment session. My name is Kyle Beyer, and I'm an associate at Carp Strategies, a community engagement consultant hired by Empire State Development, or ESD, to moderate this public workshop. At this time, I'd like to share a few housekeeping items before we begin. This slide contains instructions for optimizing your viewing experience for those of you joining tonight's workshop on a computer. Please follow the instructions on screen for either a PC or MacBook. This slide contains instructions for optimizing your viewing experience for those joining tonight's workshop on a phone. Please follow the instructions on screen for either an Android or Apple device. As a reminder, if you have any technical issues throughout tonight's workshop, please email Sharon at carpstrategies.com and our team will do our best to assist you. With that, I turn it over to Joel Kochman from ESD to present the initial findings from the draft community engagement report.
All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Kyle. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join our workshop tonight, as well as everyone who has participated over the past few months, where we've had numerous opportunities for feedback, both in person and over Zoom and through an online survey. So we really, really thank everyone's time, and it's really continued to help us think through this project and ultimately what it could be. And what we're going to talk about tonight primarily are the findings of the draft community engagement report. And just before I do that, though, however, I know for those of you who've been with us for the previous meetings, we do a little brief overview of the project just to make sure that folks who are joining for the first time tonight just have the same level of information in terms of background and obviously where we're going to today. So let's go through these slides. I just have a few on background and then we can get right into the community engagement report findings. Next slide. Okay, so the Atlantic Yards project was originally approved by ESD in 2006 and has since been modified several times to continue to respond to ongoing ownership changes, development challenges, and neighborhood needs. Among ESD's approval of the plan includes overriding local zoning regulations and in their place establishing design guidelines that govern the project's site plan and massing. So currently the plan calls for the Barclays Center and 16 residential and commercial towers with a total of 6,430 residential units, of which 2,250 would be income restricted units. It also includes more than 8 acres of open space, 3 of which have been completed and are located along Dean Street, through Block Dean and Pacific. Community facilities, including a local healthcare office, which has also been completed, and a public school, which is also completed and located on 6th Avenue. In addition to that, there's other transit upgrades and neighborhood infrastructure, including the improved Long Island Railroad tracks, the new MTA subway entrance at the Barclays Center Plaza, and other sewer upgrades as well. So next slide. So here you can see what the currently approved plan looks like. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to the Barclays Center, we have 8 residential buildings that have been completed. This includes more than 3,200 residential units, and within those units, more than 1,300 are income restricted units. In addition to what's been completed to date, 6 buildings are approved to be constructed on the platform sites, which is on Atlantic Avenue, between 6th Avenue and Vanderbilt Avenues, and then what we call Site 5, which is located on the west side of Flatbush Avenue. You can see in blue there. So when we have what we called Phase 1, which is the completed 8 buildings, but Phase 2, which is not completed, which as neighborhood residents, you're well aware, again, are these platform sites, which are currently open rail yards, and then Site 5. So the bulk of the engagement really focused on what this Phase 2 is and these sites in particular. Next slide. So last background slide here, and just to give a sense, we know that this project has been going on for decades, starting with the approvals in 2006, and even before then, the years of engagement and conversation that happened with the community leading up to that approval that led to the opening of the Barclays Arena in 2012. And then following that, thousands of new residential units that have been created. As I mentioned before, over 3,000 residential units. All along the way, there have been ownership changes and ongoing challenges. And we acknowledge here at ESD that these challenges and changes and frustrations have been very difficult for some members of the community in terms of the follow through on community commitments that were originally granted as part of this project. And so we want to acknowledge that, we're aware of that, and we hope that through this process of having worked with you all and continuing to work with the community, we can really make good on a lot of those. So, where we are today. So I mentioned ownership changes back in in 2025. The prior developer has defaulted on a loan that they received, and as a result, through a bunch of kind of steps here, we have been working with a new project site developer, and that's a joint venture between Cirrus Real Estate Partners and Elcor. And again, if you've been to our meetings before, you've been introduced to them and all the great work they do in creating housing throughout the state and really, throughout the city, the state, and really the region. So we've been really excited to work with them, and they've been a key partner in this process and obviously in shaping what we're looking at moving forward. So with that, let's go over to the community engagement summary. Next slide. So we've had hundreds of people participating in this process, and that's been one of the, for me personally, one of the most exciting things and components of our engagement process here. So you see, we've held three meetings, two in person, one virtual through the fall, winter, most recently. And then we also had an online survey with almost 600 responses. So this has been a wonderful set of data to look at. There's still, there's definitely things we want to delve into further, but it's been very instructive, and your feedback is summarized here, obviously, and continues to craft the plan that we want to work towards. Next slide. So the state, let me just say this. So this is public workshop 4. This is the end of this part of our engagement process. It is by no means the end of our engagement in general. So this is an opportunity for us to share these draft findings with you. There's an opportunity for you to provide feedback on these draft findings. We'll talk more about that later. We then will be releasing the final community engagement report next month. And this helps to shape what will be a conceptual project program that we want to share with you later this spring. And that will feed into the required public process for modifying our underlying approvals for this site. So you see here, all wonky acronyms, but the SECRA environmental review, the modified general project plan, which all come along with required public hearings and further opportunities for engagement. So looking forward to continuing all this great momentum that we've built with you all for the past few months. Next slide. All right, so now I want to just talk through at a very high level the draft community engagement report. I think we have in the chat the link to the full report. So encourage you all to read through that document and share your thoughts on the Zoom, in the public Q&A afterwards, or via the Google form, which we have open through the end of the day on Wednesday, March 25th. So that's next Wednesday. And so now we'll go through each major takeaways that ESD, the development team, and then our community engagement consultant, CARP Strategies, have identified throughout this process. All right. So affordability, big topic here, obviously. And this was really the crux and the focus of our first public workshop for the remaining portions of the project site. So as you can see here, there's a range of opinions on levels of affordability and what's the greatest importance and general consensus. But I think what the big takeaway here is that people are looking for income restricted affordable housing as a main priority as part of this project, and looking to serve a wide range of households, including very low, and moderate and middle income. You could see in that pie chart to the right, the breakdown of those components there. Next slide. So another really big topic, even though it was much more of a focus in our second workshop, it came up a lot in the first workshop. And as neighborhood residents, you're all walking around, you're seeing that there's definitely Atlantic Avenue, obviously the area around Site 5, great opportunities for streetscape improvements here. So the data that we received really brought those points home, focusing on greenery and pedestrian improvements and lighting, which were really among the top feedback areas when we asked these questions. Next slide. So with streetscape public realm also comes open space, and very similarly, folks were really excited about more open space, high quality, welcoming open space, ensuring that the open space is green and well maintained and programmed, which is what we continue to hear throughout these discussions. And that's just not just one type of program, but focusing on both active and passive uses in these open spaces. Moving on to retail. Okay. Preferences around retail for the new ground floor spaces varied. Grocery stores ranking high in both the workshops and the surveys. And we got a lot of feedback for recreational spaces and cafes and local services and restaurants. So overall, a through line of food uses and food retail uses, but in a variety of different forms. We came through with the results here. And then moving from retail, going to community spaces. So a key takeaway we found in this process was that in the air was in community spaces that people really wanted a community center, intergenerational community center, or recreation center. So these are all things that we continue to hear, both in the workshops and in the survey, and are definitely things that we will continue to focus on as we work to refine the project plan. Infrastructure. Okay, so we also asked folks about infrastructure and quality of life issues, and the results varied. I mean, you can see the public workshops feedback on housing affordability and parks and just increased capacity in general. I mean, these will be eventually large projects, so we need to make sure that capacity exists or is improved for them. We also really heard a lot about um, other more public benefits like transit and bike network infrastructure. So we were excited to see that as well. That carries through with a lot of the streetscape and open space comments we received. Next slide. Okay, accountability. So this is our last topic area, and certainly it's not the least. It's in the report's takeaways. The redevelopment of the entirety of this project, as I mentioned earlier, has been very long-standing here. Thousands of homes have been built, and thousands are still to come. But we really want to take seriously concerns raised by some participants about accountability and the delivery of new units and what those units look like. And we want to continue to work with folks on identifying ways for increased transparency and decision making during the approvals and obviously the eventual execution of these projects. So we look forward to continuing those conversations. Next slide. All right, so all of that feedback has been really helpful and with ESD and the development team and CARP thinking about what comes next and how does this shape kind of the initial broad conceptual framework of a new plan. And so we have very, very high level items here. And I want to note that this is, again, we're finishing up this phase of engagement, but it's still very early and we still have so much work to do on developing details. So this is what the level of information that we have, again, broad strokes right now to be sharing with you all. Are excited to hear your thoughts. So let's just talk about unit count. So as I mentioned earlier, the total project approved 6,430 residential units. So in the new proposal, the number would be increased by more than 2,000 units and result in a total unit count across the project of up to 9,000. The affordability. So there are different components of the site of the phase 2 project being built, and it will take, several years for this to happen, many years for this to happen. So there are initial sites that are going to be constructed on solid ground portions on terra firma. And these will be the first sites to be developed. And we have worked hand in hand with the developer to discuss what affordability could look like on those sites. And we have here 25% of those rental units on those sites at an average of 60% of AMI. This aligns with some existing housing programs that are used often in the city. And then for those later sites that we built on platforms, for instance, would be developed to have more income restricted housing units, so more than 25%. But the average AMI, so the blended incomes, would be higher than 60% of AMI. But with a note, though, that no income restricted unit would be above 120% of AMI. And then in terms of unit mix, we heard really loud and clear that folks are keen to have family size units here. So the proposal and what we're looking at with the developers would have a minimum of 30% of all the units as two bedrooms or more. Next slide. All right, so I think this ends my portion and I'll kick it back to Kyle.
Yep, thanks, Joel. So now we will begin the public comment session of tonight's workshop. While we welcome both feedback and questions tonight, we will be prioritizing questions during this session so that community members can hear direct responses from ESD and the development team regarding the draft community engagement report. Please remember that you may use the draft report feedback form found on the ESD project website to submit feedback on the draft report until midnight next Wednesday, March 25th. We will now post a link to that form in the chat. Move to the next slide. Tonight's public comment session will alternate between spoken and written questions. Written questions will include questions submitted in real time through the Q&A function on Zoom, as well as questions submitted leading up to tonight's workshop via the draft report feedback form on the ESD project website. I will go over how to ask spoken and written questions in just a moment. Please note, due to time constraints, we will likely not be able to get through all questions submitted. We are doing our best to ask the questions that have been asked the most across these platforms. Due to that, we might be consolidating or slightly rewarding questions to cover multiple individual questions. Please also be mindful of our community guidelines, which will be pasted in the chat now. Next slide. On this slide, you'll find instructions for those of you that wish to ask questions verbally using the raise hand function on Zoom. At the start of each spoken question section, I will announce the next three speakers and ask them to prepare to speak. Speakers will be identified by the name or by the last three digits of their phone number, so please listen carefully. When your name is called, you'll be asked to unmute yourself. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to ask their question. When 2 minutes have passed, you will be invited to send any remaining questions or thoughts to the ESD's email address or via the draft report feedback form on the ESD project website. Once you've spoken, we'll lower your hand for you. There's no need to lower your hand yourself. Please follow the instructions on the screen for either an Android or Apple device. If you'd like to submit a written question, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Please follow the instructions on screen for either an Android or Apple device. If you already submitted a question via the draft report feedback form on the ESD project website, we already have your question and we will be speaking to those tonight during the public comment session. Great, I'm just going to give it one moment before we get started, but we'll be starting with the verbal questions tonight.
Are you ready?
Great. Okay, so our first speaker is Michelle Deleuze. Michelle, let us know when you're ready to speak.
Hi, thank you. This is Michelle Deleuze from the Fifth Avenue Committee, one of the Brooklyn Speaks sponsors. So I appreciate the overview, appreciate the engagement. I guess the questions can kind of fall into a couple different categories. So one regarding the proposal that 25% of the units in the first phase are affordable at an average of 60% of AMI. I'm just wondering how that number was determined. I know that it's consistent with existing programs, but considering there's 866 units that are still outstanding from the original commitment, I think it would be helpful to prioritize meeting that original commitment sooner rather than later in the early phase. I think more details about the affordability proposal for the later phase is important. And finally, I think it would be super helpful to talk more about proposals around the accountability and transparency moving forward and what ideas that ESD is proposing. And finally, when we can expect the financial feasibility of whatever the new proposal is going to be at the end. And I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I'll take those questions. Thank you so much, Michelle. So I mean, I think in terms of that affordability for the initial, I don't want to call it phase, but the initial buildings being constructed. I mean, you said it is based off of existing programs. that align with 45X, for instance. So, but hear you, that does not get to the 876 in those first buildings. So this is something that we certainly want to continue the conversation about. What can we do here to maximize the number of affordable units that are constructed as early as possible? And then, details in a later phase. This again, maybe an unsatisfying answer, but is something we want to continue to talk about with the public. Like I mentioned, this is not the end of our engagement. We plan to go out and speak with, Brooklyn Speaks and neighborhood groups and community boards. So ongoing conversations are certainly needed and will happen regarding some more details around the later buildings and affordability levels. Accountability, this is something we're actively thinking about. And like, as you mentioned, and as we mentioned, it's something that came up numerous times in the public engagement. We want to make sure that this is something that we put forward, put ideas forward, and we hear thoughts on. But at this particular moment, we don't have anything concrete to share, but just it is something we hear you and we hear others. It's very important. And then the financial feasibility, I think when we really are working through, a number of different options right now. And Cirrus and Elcor are really still working on what the final massings would look, not final, but what the massings would look like, and heights and unit mix. And so all those things really play into, the kind of the final financial feasibility. So as we continue to develop the program in consultation with folks like yourself and like everyone on this call, we'll be able to really dig into that more and share more publicly with the community where the finances lead and what resources are needed.
Great. Okay. Our next speaker is Raul Rothblatt. Raul, let us know when you're ready to speak.
Hi, everyone. So I just want to say, I wish I had more time to formulate this, but this engagement process is really an embarrassment and a joke. I mean, you have not framed these questions really without letting the community guide the discussion. And I saw somewhere that the majority of people who have commented have household incomes of over 150,000. I mean, there must be a much better way to do this. And I hope you guys have some honest discussions and actually come to meet people where they are. I think the affordability, for me, I would say, I just would demand that at least 20% of the units or 30% affordable units. I would demand that at least 50% of these units are affordable to the mean income of Brooklyn residents. I think that you guys are building on public land with public subsidies, and you need to do a much better job and a much better job of actually coming out and listen. Come talk to me. Give me a call. I hope somebody gives me a call and sets up a meeting with me personally in the next couple of days to have a real discussion about this, because I don't think you framed this acceptably at all. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear you feel that way. But in terms of, just wanted to highlight the statistic you said on the incomes, which is an accurate related to the online survey results. That is unique to the online survey results. We didn't collect that data for in-person meetings. We don't think that was appropriate. However, this is all just part of a initial process. We will continue to speak with folks, and this is an ongoing conversation. So as it relates to your data points, I just want to make it clear that that is just the online survey, and to note that, the data that we have in front of us, it represents the people who participated. It doesn't represent the entire community. That would, we don't want to make that characterization either. So we acknowledge that, and that this is just the data that we were able to collect through the several month process with several hundred people participating.
Great. Okay, I don't see any hands raised at the moment, so I think we're going to move on to written questions. Okay, the first question is, will the upcoming phase of the project include affordable units in the 30 to 40%, 41 to 60%, and 61 to 100% AMI ranges?
So the next phase of the project will include housing at a range of AMIs. I think, it will, we're working exactly on those ranges. I think those numbers that we heard will be represented in some form. We don't have the exact breakdown of AMI by unit, by the units by AMI. We're not there yet, but those ranges are definitely units that we know are important and will be included.
The next question is the project financially viable without state and public subsidy to support the construction of the platform over the rail yards?
So we are just looking at the economics of the project and working closely with the development team to unpack assumptions and dig into that work. We do acknowledge that there will need to be public resources. Excuse me. There will need to be public resources to offset the value of or the costs of the platform. Platform construction is incredibly complicated. It's incredibly expensive. And I think if you look at a lot of projects throughout New York City that have platforms, there's been public resources dedicated to them.
The next question is, does ESD consider the survey responses to be adequately representative of the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that gets to a little bit of what I just um, mentioned, kind of how I responded a bit to Raul's comment, which is we don't want to, we don't believe that this is the entire community. This is the snapshot of folks who participated in our process. I will say, in terms of outreach for both the in-person events, the Zoom events, and the online survey, we had elected officials blast this out. Neighborhood groups have advertised this on a regular basis. I believe community boards advertise this. So it really was, in our view, we went to all of the appropriate and standard and yeah, appropriate stakeholders for getting the word out about these events and the survey. Um, and we got what we got.
Okay, now we're going to move back to spoken questions. Great. Our next speaker is Ronald Weiss. Ronald, let us know when you're ready to speak.
Hi, thank you. I'm here on behalf of the Park Slope Civic Council, which has been involved in commenting on this project since, I think, 2006, so 20 years. Particularly interested in your plans for Site 5. As I understand, the potential changing, moving the bulk from the plaza to Site 5, there will be a very tall building built, potentially two tall buildings built on that site. So I'm interested in what the plans are, and also traffic. That currently is a difficult intersection to navigate, and what the plans will be once the new construction is there. How will that affect that? In addition, transit. The Atlantic Avenue station currently is a fairly busy intersection, and what your plans are to address the many people who you plan to move into that area. So thank you.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for the questions. I'm going to kick it over to Joe McDonald from Sirius and Anthony Tortora from Elcor, in particular for your Site 5 question. I just do want to say regarding your comments, super valid and important comments on transit and kind of pedestrian network, streetscape, that these are things that when we do our environmental review, which is a very technical, exhaustive, analytical process, those are factors that are evaluated. And things are identified through that process to help make improvements, for the building to help make improvements to those areas. That's, on the public approval process side, but let's hear from Joe and Anthony on Site 5 vision.
Sure. Do you want me to take it? Yeah. Okay. So thank you for the question. When we came into this project, we spent quite a bit of time thinking about what were the portions of the site where multifamily rental housing could be landed sort of quickly and efficiently. And when you look at the site, it is really B6 and Site 5. And we've talked in some of the previous public sessions about our reasoning behind that. We also spent quite a bit of time thinking about the effect taller buildings on a Site 5 would have on the folks that surround it, right? So don't quote me on this, but I think the building that was supposed to be on B1 was something like 600 feet tall. Maybe it was 620. I don't have the exact number in front of me. And so, what do we see? We see a Site 5 that's on
620.
620, is that the number? Yeah, I think that's the number. So
that is,
we have a Site 5, that is along Flatbush and Atlantic, right? Which are wider streets that can take density a bit better. It's also a Site 5 that borders Pacific Street, right? Which is a tighter street. And so what we're thinking about is one tower, which is relatively tall. We showed 775 feet, and twisting that tower, right, to be off Pacific Street as much as is possible, while also being as respectful as we can with respect to Bears Garden. And we have different ideas about how we can do that. We spent quite a bit of time thinking through it. And then a smaller tower kind of twisted off that somewhere in the 400s. In terms of what we think makes that feel a little better, it's about street wall setbacks and contextual materials, but we're still working through all that. We're also attuned that a large building there will have its own set of traffic and loading docks, and we're thinking about different ways that we can position those to get that off the street as quickly as possible. So, we're happy to have further discussions in detail on that. It's something we're working through. And we are thinking about things like traffic, pedestrian access, sidewalks. There is a real public realm discussion there, some of which we can influence but do not control. There's a DOT discussion there as well. Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry, ready to move to the next question? Is that?
Yeah, unless Ronald had anything else, but yeah.
I think he's still trying. Ron is still trying.
Yeah, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I read that there is a potential for a hotel on that site as well. And if you could speak to that.
So we've thought about potentially keeping the optionality for a small number of hotel rooms on the site. It is directly across the street from a large venue, right? That isn't something that's been decided. It is something we are thinking through, however.
Great. Okay, I think we'll move on to the next speaker. The next speaker is James Ellis. James, let us know when you're ready to speak.
There we go. Sorry, it said for me to wait for you to unmute me. But in any case, thank you very much. This is following up to that Site 5 question, as Site 5 is a geographic tax lot within the North Flatbush Avenue's boundaries. We have mentioned in a couple conversations we've had over the course of years about the interest in trying to reopen access to the MTA underground that's available there through the hatch that is currently built along the Flatbush Ave front in front of the Modell's building. Can you speak to your plans or ideas about creating additional access to the MTA at that location, so to allow pedestrians or to allow riders to get out and exit the station or enter the station on the side of the street without having to cross some of these maybe crazier, hectic corridors that are currently in existence?
So I think, Joe and Anthony, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we're thinking through that right now. So there's a broader public realm discussion around pedestrian safety and Site 5 generally, right? I don't think we got all the feedback we need, but we did get good feedback around sort of what I would call some common themes around Site 5, both in the public sessions in person, right, as well as the survey. And we are exploring what that means around kind of what I would call access and pedestrian egress generally, including with the kind of additional MTA stop. I don't have a definitive kind of direction for you on that today, but it's certainly a conversation that I'm happy to have in the short term.
Yeah, a quick follow up to that. Are you aware of the current plans with the Department of Transportation around the center running bus lane and how that will impact the pedestrian flow? And have you considered those newer elements coming to the community in your design decisions?
So we are aware of the traffic study with respect to aim up, right, as well as the different plans that are occurring with respect to transportation around the site, right? There will be a full traffic study with respect to the EIS, and it is something that we're working through currently, but it's not something that we've made definitive decisions on with respect to density on Site 5, for example.
Yeah, and James, I'll just say, at ESD, we're in touch with DOT. We are aware of their Flatbush Avenue plan for the dedicated bus lane. And we will continue to be in touch with them as we work with Cirrus and Elcor on developing the sites and the plans for the sites, and especially as it relates to all the streetscape work that we hope to be doing here.
Okay, the next speaker is Mimi Mitchell. Mimi, let us know when you're ready to speak.
Okay, I'm here. Hi, good evening. I have a couple questions and then a follow-up comment. But the first question that I had, if you could answer it really quickly for me, is in regards to the online survey, was that IP restricted, meaning could only one person from one computer put in a response to the survey?
Oh gosh, I do not know. Anna, do you happen to know that question or the answer to that question?
I don't believe it was IP specific. We asked for self-identified data.
Okay, so that would mean that anyone could put in anything and I could sit there and put in 500 responses with the same answers if I really wanted to. I'm not saying that that's what happened. I'm just saying that there is definitely an incredible vulnerability in that, correct?
It would be open to that if someone were to do so. I would say we didn't get anything that stood out as duplicative, and it was a very lengthy survey, and we didn't have any that looked suspiciously similar.
Yeah.
Happy to go back and take a look, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just and the reason I did ask that and which brings me to my next point is that many of us who participated in person, we were actually and even online here we were actually representing a larger group of people. So I'm just trying to follow up more on what Mr. Rosenblatt, Mr. Raul Goldenblatt had said, is that the numbers that are in this report don't seem to reflect the numbers and the situations that we as advocates, community leaders, et cetera, see and encounter in our everyday work. These numbers are not what Brooklyn Public has been calling for. So that's why I was asking that question, because it definitely seems a little bit skewed and not really realistic to what we've seen. And I think that if I were to take a quick survey here with the 80 or so people we have here, I think that we'd get over 50% who'd probably agree with me. The AMIs that are being considered for the affordability and the affordable apartments just does not seem reflective of what the community has been calling for. And even what I experienced in I attended 2 sessions. In the 2 sessions that I attended, much less all the community board meetings, et cetera, that we tend to attend. So I guess what I'm just trying to say is deeply affordable and deep affordability is probably what this neighborhood would be looking for in terms of the site and those affordable units. So with this report and this draft of a report, what I'm reading is that that's not going to be possible, or at least at this point, that's not what you're seeing as possible. Maybe you can expand on that. I know that you're a little bit limited in your information, but it was shocking and a bit upsetting to see the numbers that I saw inside of the draft, because it just doesn't represent what I've heard the community calling for.
Yeah. So again, I'll reiterate. We do not claim that the survey, you know, their survey responses or even the in-person feedback that we received reflects the entirety of the community. It reflects the folks that participated and engaged. And again, I outlined the extensive outreach and partnership and outreach that we had in getting the word out here. But we do not claim that this represents all of the community's positions. As it relates to your question on affordability, I mean, what we have here, an average of 60% of AMI. 60% of AMI, I'll just say it because I didn't say it before and I should have. For a family of three, let's say, would be about, I have it turned in front of me, about $87,000, a little over that. And what I want to make a point to say is that's the average. So that means there will be units that are available to households at lower incomes than that, and some units available to households at higher incomes than that within the income restricted components here. So it will be a range. It isn't just going to be one number, and we intend to work with the developer to make sure that we are providing units serving very low and low income households and also moderate and middle income households as well.
Okay, now we're going to move to written questions. The next question is, demand on Housing Connect for middle income units tends to be much lower than for low income units. Would you consider delivering fewer units at deeper affordability to better meet that demand?
Fewer units at deeper affordability. I mean, I think that doesn't quite reflect the feedback that we got. And again, I caveating that that's the snapshot. But we want to make sure that we are providing units for all incomes here. And I think that's really the resounding feedback that we got, and I think aligns with a lot of conversation we have. We agree and acknowledge that there needs to be deep affordability here. We agree and acknowledge that there can be also moderate and middle income affordability with that. So that is what we've been focusing on. And again, as we continue to flesh out the affordability program, this is going to be the number one topic when we come out and speak with different stakeholder groups and community organizations in the coming months.
Okay, the next question is, the draft report states that a large part of redesigning Atlantic Avenue, pedestrian and transit and streetscape will be in the jurisdiction of the NYC Department of Transportation, and that ESD will coordinate with DOT. What will such coordination entail, and will more details be provided in future reports on the city's role and support in this process?
So I just mentioned, we are in touch with DOT. We will continue to be in touch with DOT. I think we along with Cirrus and Alcor will be presenting them at an appropriate point with the project and potential ideas for streetscape improvements and aligning with research they're doing. Many folks who are involved in the AIM-UP rezoning may know that DOT is going to be working on a study, like a streetscape study along Atlantic Avenue. So we really look forward to that and how our sites can fit into that or complement that. And it's just to repeat it, DOT will be an active partner here in the development of the public realm.
Okay, I think we're going to move back to spoken questions for a moment. The next speaker is Michelle DeLaUze. Michelle, let us know when you're ready to speak.
I'm just kind of reflecting on some of the exchanges. It seems to me that there's a couple different things that are at play here, right? One is community need around affordability, a New York City need around affordability, which is very, very well documented. What the community input has been in this process, what the historical commitments have been around this project in terms of not just the settlement with Brooklyn Speaks, but also, quite honestly, going back to the MOU with Acorn years ago.
Mhm.
And then, of course, what's feasible given, public commitments and, today's financial, world and things like that. And those are the things that are at play here. And so I think it's important to kind of like name those as all being at play and in conversation, and see how they stack up against one another. And that's where the tensions are. But I would just say that, a project, if this had been going through a New York City process, today it would be subject to a racial equity report, right? And I think we would be very clear about units that are above 80% of AMI, how that would basically continue a lot of the displacement pressures that have happened in the neighborhood, whereas units that are below, and of course, especially below lower levels of AMI, would help kind of right some of that displacement pressure. So I think we need to unpack the AMI levels significantly. And I know right now you're saying moderate/middle. Those are two different categories, and I think we should discuss them separately and not conflate them. So let's the sooner we get to the details, the better.
Yeah, and thank you. That's a very fair point on the moderate and middle and conflating them. I mean, this goes back to on what we've said so far, right? That there will be no income restricted unit higher than 120% of AMI. This is going to be a high number, but again, this is the ceiling. For a family of three, 120% of AMI is $175,000 or so. But again, averages much lower and a range of incomes, but that would be given today's income levels, the ceiling.
The next speaker is Alan Rosner. Alan, let us know when you're ready to speak.
Okay, I've unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
When I looked at the report, it doesn't always indicate how important something is. It just asks, what do we like? So when I see something, like it doesn't always reflect significance. So when you have designated drop-off pickup on local streets and things like that, it may have gotten a lower number of people responding to it or suggesting it, but the consequences of not doing this correctly are very large. And, we have no way of knowing what's going to be decided on anything. It's just that some smaller percentage thought it was important, but the consequences for everybody are quite large. Can someone address that issue and how it will be handled in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think in like a topic that you've brought up, they're all of like the streetscape considerations or public realm considerations, for instance, are all things we really need to consider and prioritize as we're planning the site, working with agency partners like DOT to plan for the site. So while yes, there's this many people said this many people said that, for certain topics, it almost, to your point, is like not really the point, right? These are all topics that are important, but maybe some people really want bike lanes, and we saw that as could be an example. So I think you make a great point, and I just want to reassure you that as it relates to the streetscape, public realm, pedestrian experience, I think there's all factors really need to be taken into account and will be taken into account as we develop plans further.
Okay, the next speaker is Mimi Mitchell. Mimi, let us know when you're ready to speak.
Apologies, I had meant to lower that. Sorry, please go on to the next person. Thanks.
Great. We don't currently have any further questions at the moment. If anyone would like to speak again, reminder to raise your hand. The raise hand function on Zoom. You can also use the Zoom Q&A feature. I'll wait a moment and then we'll pause temporarily. We are committed to remaining on until 8 p.m. tonight. So you're welcome to ask questions up until that time. Oh, we have another question. Roll, Ratblot.
Yeah, hi. So I'm wondering how you have gone into public housing developments around here, what your specific outreach to them was.
Yeah, Anna, can you speak to that? Anna, oh, Anna, you're on mute. Oh, you can't hear. Okay. So I'm gonna attempt, because this was Anna's domain and community relations. But we did I think reach out to them in terms of the outreach for the meetings and talking with tenant associations for getting their word out and participation in the meetings. I actually think one of our staff. Oh, there you are. Great. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? I apologize. The question was about NYCHA, correct?
Yes.
Yes, I apologize. This would be my government technology failing me, perhaps. Yes, we actually had a colleague go to one of the local tenant association meetings. I have to thank the Assembly Member Sue Forrest for flagging that date. We flyered in the areas near a few different complexes. And we also welcome, for ongoing engagement, we also welcome feedback if folks have thoughts about groups we ought to engage, et cetera. We just asked today the members of the Atlantic Yards Community Development Corporation to give us suggestions as well, but we welcome any contacts or suggestions folks may have that they feel have to be reached out to. Apologies about the tech.
Okay, the next speaker is Ronald Weiss. Ronald, let us know when you're ready.
Going back to Site 5, how have you factored in the effect of the two towers on the library, the branch library that is adjacent? I had seen some proposals, I think, in the past to put the loading dock on that side, and curious as to how this will affect the library, access to the library, shadows on the library. I mean, it's not an unimportant cultural aspect of that neighborhood.
Oh, absolutely. Joe and Anthony.
Sure.
Take this.
So with respect to loading docks, our goal is actually, and we're still working through this, some of it has to do with the adjacent uses, including the MTA. Our goal is to have the loading docks within the building, right? So to effectively pull the trucks off the street. And we're thinking about the best places to do that. There's a traffic impact to that, right? And so there's actually some kind of gives and takes and pushes and pulls about where you put those one or two entrances or exits. But the goal is to pull trucks off the street as much as possible, which we think is a win. In terms of shadow and wind studies, right? We're starting to look into those right now. Tall towers do cast shadows. We've tried to take the height of the tower down as much as we could, while getting to a unit count we thought was appropriate, given we're trying to get rental residential units and ultimately affordable residential units out of it, and then to kind of push that density as much as we could along the Flatbush side and toward the Barclays Center side, right, where the shadows are less. But it is not perfect, if that makes sense. It's something that we're continuing to try to iterate to be sort of better and better. You're on mute.
Appreciate the comments, and if you can find a way not to cast shadows, then then you'd be working for a different employer. But no, but I would hope and expect that in this planning, the impact on the library or a potential impact on the library, would be not perhaps not the first thing that you should consider, but it definitely should be on the list.
Understood, and thank you for the comment.
Okay, the next speaker is Alan Rossner. Alan, let us know when you're ready.
Okay, I unmuted. I wasn't going to bring this up, but since shadows have come up, I'll raise the issue of future technologies. And I would like some consideration given how in the future, if such things as thin film photovoltaics can be applied to windows, how would you allow electricity generated by people living within your project to be added to the grid? So I know you don't really have to answer anything like that now, but it's something to think about, because in the future, that's going to happen. They are already, and New York State is looking into the legality of it, making it legal, plug in photovoltaic units such that anybody living in your buildings could theoretically provide electricity to the grid. I think you need to think about that issue now so that when it comes in the next 5 to 10 years, you're capable of handling it in a good way. So just something to, food for thought, because, there will be 5 to 10 years changes in technology affecting this. I'll wait for any sort of answer.
So, Joel, is it okay if we take?
Yes, please. Sorry. Yes. I just assumed you'd go right for it.
Yep. So I would say a few different things.
This is interesting.
Their window is called BUE, which is similar to what you're mentioning. We are considering those types of systems. There are pluses and minuses. Another similar system to what you're thinking about on the sustainability side would be geothermal. Elcor, and I'll let Anthony speak to it, is a leader in geothermal in New York State. That is very hard to do over an active rail yard, right? Because you have to drill very large wells, and we can go into how expensive it is, but it is extraordinary. But there is the possibility of that on B6. Unclear if it will work there, given some of the other things that have to go underneath it, but certainly on Site 5. So Anthony, maybe you have more detail.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Joe said, we'll be exploring a variety of sustainability options for these buildings. Each site brings its own unique, opportunities and constraints that we'll be working within. But your comment's a great one, and we pride ourselves in thinking about what's not beyond what's needed today, but what will be needed by the time these buildings are delivered. So it's very much a focus of the development team. So thank you for the comment.
I see a hand was just raised. One second. Elaine Weinstein. Let us know when you're ready.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Previously, you talked a bit about the pedestrian problem, the bike lanes, and all that goes into the corridor of Atlantic Avenue, therefore Atlantic Yards. Building that 700 huge building that you were talking about, 720, I think you mentioned, will add a huge number of people to the area, about a block away from a middle school, and working with AMUP as well as DOT, it seems that needs to be a priority. Absolutely, the lowest income possible for residents and renters is a key importance. But living in this area has such a huge volume already between the police department, fire department, and the school. Adding that number of residents, the concept of walking safely is I just can't imagine being able to walk safely, especially crossing Atlantic Avenue. And as being involved with the AMUP process, what we saw was that most residents had number 1 and 2 was around safety and pedestrian safety in terms of crossing street. So I would say to you that there are many number 1 priorities, but if you know this neighborhood, that's been an ongoing priority and it needs to be in the forefront of your mind as you're designing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the comment, Lane, and we definitely agree.
I'm not seeing any new hands in the chat or questions in the Q&A feature. Just a reminder, we're here until 8 p.m. So if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand or submit a question through the Q&A feature on Zoom. Otherwise, we'll pause momentarily and wait for questions to come in. Okay, it looks like we have a new question. Our next speaker is James Ellis. Let us know when you're ready.
Great, thank you. Since I don't want to hijack this with just Site 5, however, I would like to also talk, since there's open space in this venue, to discuss also the opportunity. I know it's streetscape related or the street design related, but the idea of the design of that site could be really an improvement to the community's pedestrian flow if the base level of the bulk were to be elevated to some degree and allowed us to be able to see through from 4th Avenue to Flatbush Avenue and to Atlantic Avenue to create that visible corridor that connects them all instead of the behemoth that could be in the middle. Considering people exiting out on the 4th Avenue exit of the subway sees what could be currently a giant block building and doesn't realize the connectivity to the nearby other assets of the arena or the shopping center or other similar assets nearby. So again, just throwing in there as a part of design elements of what this building could look like. If the base bulk would be somewhat elevated or made like Lightnary or Plazier more feeling, I think that would add a lot of value to the overall design. More comment and question if that's being thought about.
Yeah. Joe and Anthony, anything to respond to?
So we're thinking through those issues. I sort of at a base level, I would say ideologically, I actually agree with you. I think a couple of things to recognize. There's an obligation to relocate PC Richards onto the ground floor, right? And so when you're trying to have internal loading docks plus entrances plus a PC Richards, while it is a big site, it's not that big of a site, right? And so we're thinking about trying to get a podium which has setbacks so it doesn't feel overbearing. and how can we land the buildings to try to achieve some of the things that you've noted. But Site 5 also has its own constraints, if that makes sense. I would say as a New York City development site goes, it's not a hugely constrained site, but it's not sort of like tabula rasa. It's not a whiteboard. But I'm happy to have a more in-depth discussion about what we're thinking about and some of your thoughts as well.
Maybe you have a reading question next. In the best case scenario, when would the first building open and receive residents?
Joe and Anthony? Joe, if you're talking right now.
All right, my mute. Yeah, the mute
Yeah.
did unmute. So what we've thought a lot about with respect to that site is how to move that date forward, right? And so from where we sit today, we have an EIS in between where we could break ground, right? And so I think breaking ground here in 1Q 2028 or 4Q 2027 would be very, very, very fast. One of the things we've committed to do is to spend the pre-dev dollars on the platform and the first two sites during the EIS phase, right? Because what we don't really want is a 2-year EIS followed by a year or two of pre-development. And by decoupling B6 from the platform, which we have confirmed can be done. So when we came into this, we had done a lot of work, but that was like a very educated guess. It's now been confirmed by engineers and others. We think that there is a scenario where the 1120 platform can be built around B6, potentially with Site 5 coming shortly thereafter. That puts residents in these buildings in the very early 2030s versus the mid or late 2030s. That's also why we spent a lot of time converting Site 5 into mostly multifamily residential, and why we knew it would be very important to talk about the particular affordabilities on those sites. So, these projects are complicated. There's a lot of stakeholders. We study these projects, and what is important to remember about a project like this is that it's actually two separate projects. It's actually an infrastructure project that becomes a residential development project, if that makes sense. And the positive thing is that a lot of the sort of uncertainty with respect to the infrastructure part of 1120 was taken by the 5 years of Greenland. But there's still quite a way to go here, though I think we are very well positioned today to do this as quickly as it can reasonably be done.
Maybe have one more written question. I'm sorry I joined late, so forgive me if this was asked and answered. Is the plan still to have a non-continuous retail along Atlantic Avenue? Any precedents for this being successful anywhere?
Joe and Anthony, would you like to take that?
Yeah, happy to take it. So I think, thank you for your question. I think that's something that we're actively studying. One of the key elements of feedback that we got from the community engagement process was the integration of retail with public realm and open space. And we're actually studying the best way to do that, and how to preserve the authenticity of the retail and how ensure that it looks and feels like Brooklyn. So that's something that we're working very hard on, and working through and studying with our design team.
Okay, I see a raised hand, so we'll jump back to spoken questions. The next speaker is Ronald Weiss.
Thank you. Could you add a little more context, please, to the commitment that was made to PC Richards?
Joe?
Yeah, they have a right to relocate into the space. And this was part of the original sort of Atlantic Yards eminent domain process. So much before the time of anybody on this phone call from the ESD or developer side.
Our next speaker is Raul Rothblatt.
Hi. I would love to have as much contextual architecture design using local artists, referring to the local history, like, for instance, the studio of Louise Bourgeois was destroyed in making it. Are you going to have ways to incorporate things like that into it, and to the neighborhood history? The Spalding factory that was also demolished to build the one of the other buildings. Do you have what's your process to find local resources and work with local artists and be as contextual as possible?
Joe, let you take that one.
Yeah, sure. So I think with respect to overall building design, we've spent a lot of time about thinking through the types of techniques that can make tall buildings feel less imposing, right? And when you look at this part of Brooklyn and other parts of Brooklyn, it has its own aesthetic, right? And it also has its own history. And so we're thinking through different types of setbacks, different types of materials, different types of podium strategies, as was mentioned by, I think it was James earlier, that could make that work throughout the site. In terms of particular artists, we're just not at that stage, right? So we're still at the conceptual blocking stage. But what I would say is we do not want this to be a development where if you were dropped into it, you would not know not just the city you're in, but the borough you're in, right? And there are other large scale developments that I think haven't achieved that. And the reason for that is it's actually hard to achieve in these types of large scale developments. So we're thinking a lot about the ground plane and what does it mean, as well as making sure that the types of retail, the types of sort of ground plane elements here allow folks from Brooklyn not only to use the services, but also to potentially run the businesses and things of that nature.
The next speaker is Roel Rothblatt.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Roel, I think you're muted.
I muted myself, got muted.
There you
go. Yeah, so I just want to get a sense of the process for doing that. I mean, for instance, the first Botanic Gardens was on this site that was opened up 200 years ago. I mean, it would be good to get a sense of what your process will be, or how you envision the process of engaging with that, with those things, even if you're not there yet. Like, how would you imagine that to happen?
Raul, thanks again for your question. Yeah, I think the process is as we go from concept into actual design. There would be extensive community outreach to try to bring in, whether it be local artists or other programs, to again deliver something that's contextual and consistent with the surrounding area. We've been successful in doing that with some of our other projects. It's always a focus of ours as we get into the design. We pride ourselves, Cirrus and Elcor, on delivering projects that are contextual. So it's a priority, and as we get further into the design process, it'll be a focus.
Hey, our next speaker is Isaiah Dawson. Let us know.
Hi. Yes, I'm Isaiah Dawson, the community liaison from Assembly Member Bear Soufront Forest's office. In terms of housing availability, would the new development plan include a quota for 2 and 3 bedroom units to accommodate low and middle income families?
Joe and Anthony, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so we would like this to have at least 30% family size units. That's 2s and 3s, right? And I think that kind of the context of your question and thinking about what does that mean for low income and middle income is, very important, right? We see a need, especially in the moderate income side, for family sized units. There's a give and take to that, however, right? And so this is only such a large site and those are bigger units. So we have to think about how many we can get in to make it financially feasible. But by definition, the more units are family size, the less overall sized units there are. If you look at a market rate development today, that's typically in the low to mid 20s. So we're hoping to outperform that by quite a large amount, and we would anticipate that being part of the overall documentation from a governance structure.
Okay, we have a new written question. In the best case scenario, when would you complete the full project?
Joe, I'll keep that with you.
I think if things go quite well, you could complete this in the late 2030s. I think when you look at that from realizing that shovels or hammers, however you want to refer to it, aren't going to start swinging or shoveling here for about 2 years. So you're really starting in 2028. That is very fast. I want to contextualize, for everyone, like Anthony and I study these types of projects. It's sort of our job. But one thing for everybody here to keep in mind is that, as I said before, at least on the platform sites, it's an infrastructure project that becomes a housing development project. And if you actually study urban rail projects globally, 75% of them are late, right? And so we're very confident that we can deliver this sort of on the schedule that we put forth. A lot of that is because much of the hard work has been done kind of in the ground under the rail that people may not sort of fully appreciate both the cost and complexity of that. But there's a long way to go here. There's fluctuations, tariffs, and all these things in between, right? So this is what we do. And we've looked at it in a very sober way. Does that make sense? We're not giving you numbers that are everything goes well, but those are not also numbers that everything goes wrong, is how I would contextualize it.
Okay, I don't see any new hands in the chat or questions in the Zoom feature. So since there are no further questions at the moment, we'll pause briefly. We'll resume once new
Did I
questions
successfully
come in.
unpause just now?
Yep, go ahead.
Great. I also just wanted, since we have a moment, I wanted to thank Isaiah for speaking on behalf of Assemblymember Sue Forrest. Also want to acknowledge, since we have a second, we have staff on from a number of electeds, Assemblymember Simon, Councilmember Hudson, Attorney General James, Councilmember Hanif. I think I spotted everyone, but if I missed you, let me know. But thank you for joining. Really appreciate that you've been part of this process.
Great. Yes. So as I was saying, we'll pause momentarily. Again, if the new questions roll in through raised hands or the Zoom feature, we'll resume. And just a reminder, this meeting remains open until 8 p.m. Okay, it looks like we have a new question, a written question. I read that B8 is under consideration to be not built and units added to the other buildings. Wondering if this is still considered and what the motivation is behind it.
Well, I will say it is still being considered as part of the proposed site plan, but I'll leave it to Joe and Anthony to explain the rationale for those moves.
Sure. So what's important to remember about blocks 1120 and 1121, these are the platform sites, is that when the original MGPP was put into place, which I think is roughly 20 years ago now, the track geometries of what needed to be built for the MTA weren't fully understood. So for folks who followed this long enough, you may remember that on 1121, there was really kind of like one track at the top of that. When you look at what is on B8 today, you effectively have track switching. So I'd encourage you to go take a look at it. And the issue is you have such a high density of tracks that there's really very few places to land a column. And what that means is you are more or less building a building to suspend it in midair, which is extraordinarily expensive. And it is so expensive and the spans are so long that you actually can't have a very tall building on it. We also heard sort of loud and clear in our in-person meetings, one-on-ones and through the survey, a desire for open space and contiguous open space. And so when you have the opportunity to move bulk to where it is easier and more efficient to build, while creating more open space and sort of centralized open space, which is open, not a courtyard, not a backyard, it's sort of a double whammy or a double win. And so the way that Cirrus and Elcor have approached this, which I think could be perplexing, is to exercise restraint in certain areas versus trying to put bulk everywhere, but trying to find areas like Site 5 and B6 where bulk can be delivered, we think, reasonably and quickly, while bringing affordability at the same time, and sort of maximize there, if that makes sense. We spent a lot of time with our consultants and engineers, as well as our internal staff, thinking about different ways to make B8 work. But ultimately, when you look at mission-driven capital investment, public investment, and just the need for open space overall, which was a clear and consistent theme in both the surveys and the sort of in-person sessions, we thought it made sense to sort of make that exchange.
Okay, and the final question for the evening is, I arrived late and only heard some of the Q&A, not the presentation. Will we be able to access the recording of this?
Sorry, this could be me. Sorry, Anna, what are we doing with the recording?
You're good. Yeah, we are putting up the recording. We have the past recording as well as the presentations from past meetings on the ESD website, esd.ny.gov/Atlantic Yards. I can write it in here, I believe, so it will be up.
Okay. The time is now 8:01, and we have now reached the conclusion of Public Workshop 4. Before closing, please remember that you may use the draft report feedback form posted on the ESD project website to submit feedback on the draft report until midnight on Wednesday, March 25th. That's next Wednesday. Thanks again for joining tonight. Take care.